Hi everyone, welcome. I'm so excited to be presenting tonight our author talk with Jennifer DeVere Brody about her forthcoming book, Moving Stones, about the art of Edmonia Lewis, and a wonderful conversation tonight with Arielle Gray, one of our former Lavender Rhino recipients. I am Matisse Dupont. I am the director of engagement and advancement for Queer History Boston. In case anyone's new to QHB, welcome. We are Boston's queer community archives. We've been dedicated to documenting, preserving, and sharing Boston's LGBTQ plus history since 1980. So if you're at all interested in queer and trans history locally in Boston, please sure to follow us on our socials, subscribe to our newsletter, all that good stuff. Here, I'm just gonna put those in the chat. You've got some links there if you want to, give us a look. I'm really excited to also, before we get going, we have a couple other really cool Edmonia events coming up soon. Before we also have a little museum meetup coming up on Saturday the 30th. And we're also working on a panel over at the Museum of African American History later this month at the beginning of June. So look, some really exciting things coming up about Edmonia. But first and foremost, we've got Jennifer DeVere Brody. Jennifer is a professor of theater and performance studies and African American studies at Stanford University. Her research has been supported by awards from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Monette Horowitz Foundation to Combat Homophobia, the Ford and Mellon Foundations, and the Bogliasco Foundation. She has published several books with Duke University Press: Impossible Purities, Blackness, Femininity, and Victorian Culture, Punctuation, Art, Politics, and Play, James Baldwin's Little Man, co-edited with Nicholas Boggs, and the forthcoming, what we're here to talk about tonight, Moving Stones, about the art of Edmonia Lewis. Joining Jennifer is Arielle Gray. Arielle Gray is a writer, artist, and native Bostonian. She is a reporter at WBUR, Boston's NPR station, where she has covered Black and Brown communities through the lens of history, art, and culture for the past 8 years. In 2026, she was the recipient of the inaugural Gwen Ifill Emerging Journalist Award from Simmons University. And in 2025, her reporting was published in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum's catalog for their Alan Creight exhibition. Her writing and work have appeared at NPR, BBC, the Boston Globe, Cosmopolitan, Glamour, the Boston Art Review, and more. Welcome, Jennifer and Arielle. I'm gonna pin y'all and make sure that you're up here, and then I'll get the screen sharing if you want to just say hi.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, Matisse. And I want to say that it's really an honor for me to be here with all of you, with Jeffrey Richard Mall, who's in the room, who has the exhibition Set in Stone out in Essex that you have to see before it closes on June 7th. And especially with Arielle, who's, did a beautiful review of that show for WBER and highlighted one of Edmonia Lewis's sculptures out in the St. Mount Auburn Cemetery, right out in Cambridge, the Hygeia, and talked about the chisel work there. And Ariel, I'm such a fan not only of your writing but also of your exquisite photography. It's just an honor to be here with everyone. And I want to just say one quick thing. I'm talking to you from the Muwekma Ohlone Homelands out in Northern California. And it's more fitting, however, that I'm doing so under the aegis and auspices of Queer History Boston, because they were one of the first people to also include Edmonia under a kind of queer mantle in their important book, and we'll see a slide soon, called Improper Bostonians, which also has a beautiful introduction by the late Barney Frank, who just died a couple of days ago. But Edmonia is there on page 57. So the book is still available. Get that. And just thank you, Queer History Boston, Ariel, everyone.
Yay! And congratulations, Jennifer. I have been able to go through portions of the book. There's so much in there to digest, and I found myself stopping again and again and again just to kind of really chew on all of these different points that you were making when it comes to Lewis and her life. And I think this is actually a really great place to start. Obviously, it's the first slide in the deck. Um, but this project being compiled by the History Project, Queer History Boston, I thought was really cool. And you kind of, discuss this in the intro of the book. Um, and you say, it may be impossible to determine or define Lewis definitively as queer, but it is nevertheless possible to identify and amplify queer aspects of her oeuvre. Um, can you just talk a little bit about that and why the inclusion of Edmonia in something like this can be so important?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I think that, one of the things that makes her a queer subject, in fact, is the fact that, um, you know, there's an openness about her biography. We're still learning things, and those open gaps, you might say, are a mark in some sense of her queer and
Mm,
radical aspects of her life. And so following people like Saidiya Hartman in her book on Wayward Lives, Radical Girls, Wayward Girls, Radical Lives, um, thinking about people who have to sort of smash out a different kind of way of being in the world. That's mostly a book about 20th century queer Black women and subjects, but I think there are a lot of aspects of the openness of Lewis's life that lead to that. She certainly was, as this book, Improper Bostonians, characterizes her as part of the widening circle of around Charlotte Cushman, a famous lesbian actor from the 19th century actress who played Romeo to her sister, and also helped to start Lewis's career in Boston, but then was also part of the kind of coterie in Rome where she ended up. So that's sort of by proximity. Lewis never married. She was kind of an odd woman in that respect. She does, in a portrait we'll see, wear a wedding ring, but that was about her Catholicism. Um, Several other 19th century women in her circle in New England in the 1870s talk about wanting there to be more Miss Edmonia Lewises. So there's always been a certain kind of fan base of beloved sisters and women who conscripted her for their own desire. And that goes right from the 19th century in her own time all the way up, I think, to the present. That's how I try to make the case, relying on, so many other queer scholars like Isaac Julian or Imani Perry, who are looking for, right, those queer subjects in an archive that would often exclude them or not know exactly what to do with them. And it's those little open moments that I try to fill with even my own desire around that and certain other things. Yeah, we'll talk more.
mm. Yeah, and something that you mentioned too that just like completely threw me. Um, you mentioned gaps as being a space. They're productive, right? They're spaces for production. And I just thought that that is such a beautiful way to think about the way that a lot of these folks like Hartman are engaging with archives and through this process of like critical fabulation. And
Mhm.
it's kind of in like this gap that you kind of first came across Lewis kind of in an archive.
That's right. Which again, Queer History Boston is the perfect place to be talking about some of these questions. Like to say that Lewis found me. I took an illicit photograph in an archive in London. Matisse and I were just talking about his first trip over there, and uh, it was in the early 90s, and I think I had an Instamatic camera, and I was working on another subject, Charles Reed, who was part of my first book. I think I have some slides of this coming up. Yeah, that was my first book. And then this is the page that I happened to come across, and I took this picture, really not knowing who Lewis that you see there, and her sculpture. And that's another kind of part of the way we come to know her is through suturing her with her and seeing her next to her sculptures. But I just took the photograph, and it wasn't until like a decade later that I came to realize, by some magical force or felicity or counterfactual possibility. She had come to reach from beyond the grave, and now I'm part of an in widening circle of people who have fallen in love with Edmonia Lewis. I just got this book the other day. It's the first novel, and it's about Edmonia Lewis. And this is sort of the year of her, and I think we'll see a lot more. But there's a way in which once you start to learn about her story and her artwork in particular, um, there is, I think, a fascination, and whether, she lets go of you or not, I don't know. And I hope tonight that if you learn nothing else, do more research, seek her out, see the exhibitions that are coming up this year, because it's a phenomenal story.
Yes, yes. And I had the pleasure of going over to PEM and seeing that exhibition and covering it. Um, and I think I may have accidentally skipped over Maud.
Oh,
Um,
well, we'll come back to her
we'll
at,
come back
at
to
the
Maud.
end.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the end, yes. I'm so excited for that.
Mhm. This is one of the queer artists that are interlocutors in my book, who either directly, in Maud's case, or sometimes indirectly, take up issues that I see in Lewis's sculpture. So
Mm,
people like Micheline Thomas or Simone Lee or Kent Monkman, who's a native artist from Canada, and his alter ego Mischief Eagle Testicle, taking up various aspects of either nudity or
mm.
um, animation, other sorts of queer aspects. The rose for the case of Simone Lee, which I think we'll talk about.
Yes.
So this is another queer aspect of the book, is that it doesn't at all follow a linear kind of trajectory. It is not a traditional biography by any means. It, in
Mm,
fact, makes a point of talking about, and that's the key term there, about sort of this subject in the round that we continue to circumambulate and um,
mm,
interact with from multiple aspects that can never
mm,
fully give us, um, you know, the woman in full.
mm.
And in that way, I
Yes.
think that her story is mimetic of her métier. That is to
Mm.
say, three-dimensional sculpture meant to be largely viewed in the round.
Right, right. And, I'm wondering if you could just talk briefly, that kind of plays into the title, moving stones, like quite literally thinking of these moving around and about these stones in order to truly view them. And then also, these sculptures capturing movement, um, just forever free.
Yes, one of her most important works, and I think one of the first works by a Black person to show freed slaves, and
Mhm.
doing so, of course, with the broken chain. This was made to commemorate the Emancipation Proclamation, sometimes called other versions Morning of Liberty. But you can see the main subject there with his broken manacle held above the
Mm,
female figure praying next to him. Um, and it's a very unusual representation, because usually there are lots of images of Lincoln freeing the slaves, and almost all are on bended knee. And of course, that's playing into the ways in which the hierarchy of how the body is posed also gives us a meaning for sculpture. The other thing, if you've never seen one of Edmonia Lewis's sculptures before, if this is your first view, you'll notice that it's done in this absolutely shimmering, amazing white Carrara marble. And yet we still think about these as racialized figures through other indices like hair, the
mm,
title, the broken manacle and ball and chain, other things. This is something that we have to grapple with when we think about how her choice to be a neoclassical sculptor in particular, um, you know, worked in the racial economy of the 19th century.
Right. And this was one of the pieces that I had conflicted feelings about when I saw it in person. And you bring this up in the book. It's one of the tensions that you explore, you know, feeling like the sculpture is beautiful aesthetically, but wondering, you know, what went into the process of deciding how to represent Blackness, and perhaps, you know, what were the decisions made in making a sculpture that was perhaps more palatable. And you included this amazing quote from Lisa Collins. Her Blackness is removed from view. Perhaps wary of the relationship between visibility and assault, Edmonia Lewis attempted to veil her freedwoman and in this manner protect her from harm. And I thought that was such a beautiful point, this idea of preemptive protection. And it just kind of made me really rethink the way that some of the tensions that I was having with her work, which you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, it took me a while, even though I majored in Victorian studies and, I love 19th century sculpture and art. It took me a while to come around to figuring out how to talk about her work
Mhm.
and think about it, and why she made some of the decisions she did. And again, some of that is just uh, was being surmising things. We have little writing about her in her own words about why she made some of the work. And yet there, she was planning to do something on Phyllis Wheatley. She did actually do a few terracottas and bronzes. So this is a photo from an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. Sorry, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And this whole sculpture was actually on another contemporaneous coeval sculptor of the time, a man named Carpeau, who did other images also sometimes in different materials. So that
Mm,
question of the materiality, other sculptors, would use ebony. Or there's another quote I talk about in the book from the playwright Ibsen, who says that he would rather see the head of a Negro sculpted in ebony, right, than in white
mm,
marble. So there was
mm,
also a certain value-laden aesthetic mapping where
mm,
white marble was seen to be the apotheosis of, the best materials. And so there was also this other argument that, you should never sculpt uh, such subjects, right, in
mm,
this high quality material, right?
mm,
So
mm.
it what it does for me, and I think the thing that's really important is that we talk about the various ways in which we might read this work,
Right, right,
and
right,
that
right.
it's something to think about, and her work is really amazing to think with
Hmm.
and about.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And you brought up so many different things for me. Like that quote from Lisa Collins reminded me of something called the captive maternal that Dr. Joy James talks
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
about. And, she talks about how survival under captivity requires compromise, right? And so Lewis, knowing that she's operating from this place of fugitivity, um, it's easy to imagine her making these decisions, and easier for me at least to understand some of these artistic decisions. Yeah.
And some of them were also economic decisions.
Right.
She carved a lot of two figures in one block of marble because that can be cheaper to do. But also, it's important to remember Darlene Clark Hines' similar ideas around exactly
Mm,
what you're talking about with Joy James of the
mm,
culture of dissemblance, right? That you
mm,
don't always want to give everything up for a particular kind of audience, right? And she
right.
herself, had been and constantly was compared to her work. You couldn't ignore.
Mm,
her own embodiment. I don't know if we've seen an actual picture. We saw the sketch in the show, in the piece, but this is more of her work, some of her beautiful carvings, the Hygeia. But these are
yes.
images taken at the height of her career in Chicago um, by a German photographer named Henry Roche, who photographed a lot of artists. And these are little carte de visite, just about this big that she would circulate both to show her work as an artist, but also, as I mentioned earlier, as kind of sometimes tokens of affection for
Mm,
Black women waiting to receive them from Rome back here in the States. And the fact that they exist is already just incredible. And we're so lucky to be able to gaze upon her visage as vestiges of our own kinds of queer history. You can
mm,
see in one of them here, she's wearing their little ring. And I had a long discussion with a friend of mine who works in 19th century fashion about this jacket that she has on, which might have been in the studio, but it's a very unusual, rare silk brocade. She also, in the other image, has on her talma or her sculptor's hat. And she is working in a predominantly male um, profession at the time, although there were a lot of other women sculptors, many from Boston, as I've mentioned. She said, though, that she left the land of liberty in 1865 when we have her passport from Boston because the land of liberty had no room for a colored sculptor. So
mm,
she's very clear
mm,
that in order to carry out her work and be a working artist, which she was her entire life, it required this sort of diasporic sacrifice of leaving a place of her birth. She was born in 1844 in New York, um, and really becoming an exile
mm,
an
mm.
exile in art, I would say.
Yeah. I love the delve into the fashion because that is so important. And you describe this outfit, I believe, as dandified masculine work attire, which I loved. Um, can you tell us a little bit more or talk a little bit more about like what fashion can tell us about somebody?
hmm Well, one thing I would say is that for someone like a sculptor, such as Edmonia Lewis, they were thinking about drapes, about fashion, about the body,
Mhm.
in order to do their work. And it so happened that the little snippets we have of, Edmonia entertaining, playing her guitar, in her studio in Rome for making, meals for friends. It was a live work studio situation. Um, that she once went down to Richmond with a friend as sort of to teach the newly freed, formerly enslaved folks in Richmond, Virginia, and they had their bags of clothes stolen, and it was reported in the newspaper. Um, and, this fact that she always, in many of the images we have, and there are not a lot of them, Makeda Best has a lovely piece about them in the Set in Stone catalog, and other people like Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw has also written about these images. Um, she cared a lot about her appearance. Um, that is very clear that she had that aesthetic sensibility. She loved opera, and so the kinds of clothes she's pictured in were very much a la mode from what I've been able to research. In another one of these, she has like a doubled skirt. These were sort of high fashion for the time. Mhm.
Um, Yeah, I also just really wanted to talk about the side eye. You brought up the side eye. I had to bring it up.
It might not be in this picture, but yes,
I think it's in the other. It's in
yeah,
the other one.
yeah. But no, the way she's posed. I mean, this image of her with the Greek key with her um, arm on the podium.
Mm.
there's another one where this is an early photograph of her I put in because it's taken in the Tremont studio by Augustus Marshall, who's a Boston photographer, one of the first portraits we have of her. Um, but, she ultimately has one where she sort of has her hands on her hips. And I think her direct gaze with the camera, photography and Edmonia Lewis came of age together. So
Mm,
there's not really a precedent for how one should not pose in an image. You know, Sometimes these took a while to be produced. The carte de visite could be made quicker, but I just think even from any of the images, she's so striking. And you can see here, her hair is parted perfectly. She's paid attention, right? And again, these puff sleeves are the highest fashion to her appearance, and that I think that's another aspect of her artistic um, being. And I would say as well, a lot of people. There's another show coming up about her brother was a barber, and she came from a family who did things with their hands. She always credited her mother for her desire to make the form of things, and her mother was Mississauga and Anishinaabe and wanted to, taught her before her death uh, how to make moccasins, to work in various traditions of basket weaving. So she's always been an aesthetic person, or as Kelly Jones might say, she's always been I-minded, EYE minded. And I think that comes through in all aspects. And I have a chapter about photography in the book because of the ways in which Edmonia Lewis used it to make images of others, to advertise her work, and as I said earlier, to think about her own uh, production as an artist, her own portraits, like kind of like selfies for a different generation. I
I'm
think you're
still
muted,
muted.
Arielle.
I'm
That's
still
all right.
muted. It is too far into the 2020s to still be muting myself on Zoom. I'm sorry.
Not to worry. It's a miracle
Um,
we can do this and have people joining us from Belgium.
yes, I know. It is. It is incredible. I'm trying to think of where we should go next because there's so
Hmm.
much. We're not
Hmm.
going to be able to fit everything into the
Yeah.
hour.
No,
But
and I know there are questions from the audience too. So yeah, we
yes,
can just anywhere you want to go. I'm in
I
your
would,
hands.
yeah, I would really love to. I mean, you dedicate a whole chapter to roses.
I
Can
do.
we talk a little bit about that and
Hmm.
why?
Sure. So, it seems sort of strange, but one of the things that I was fascinated by is there was one of the first ones there was in her sculpture, which is a winged figure, a kind of poor Cupid or Cupid caught in a trap, which she did. And you can see the rose at the bottom. And, roses are kind of queer emblems. And she started to sculpt more and more of them throughout her career. So another way in which this is a book that sort of takes queer looking seriously is to not necessarily view these as the way of traditional maybe art historian or the way we should. We don't really necessarily talk about even the image as a whole, but I was thinking about the marginalized use of these flowers on often the bases. I mean, it can be a Christian symbol, but I think it can be also, according to people like Omisaki Tinsley, in her book on pink, talks about roses and Gertrude Stein. And so I sort of play out the manifold queer aspects of the emblem, starting actually with Shakespeare's Cleopatra, which it seemed to me, as I was, engrossed in learning so much more about Lewis's work, that, her work with roses um, were reminiscent, as so many other queer scholars have thought about, of either female genitalia, the question of death, of beauty, of um, so many aspects. And this picture, which appears on the cover, but it's tinted lavender, I kind of collaborated with the really brilliant artist Yetunde Olabaju, and we were going very fast here, but that was a whole little section. Oh, you can see the cover, yeah, with the lavender roses. And so she did a whole project where she digitized, and we did this cover together. It's from their work called Shooting Star in 2024. It's a digital collage, and they had a whole series where you could even make your own collage based on the photographs, the sculptures, and kind of breaking them apart, queering them, dispersing them, and recombining them to, sort of reimagine their connections. Yeah, I just started thinking about Lewis's penchant for carving these kinds of roses, and found 19th century corollaries. There's an artist named Sarah Mapps Douglas, no connection to Frederick Douglass, who knew Lewis in his time and her time. Um, but she painted these beautiful watercolors of roses to other sort of female friends. So this one's, she's a little bit earlier, 1833, and it's called I Love a Rose. Um, Also, in the base, at the base, as I was saying, of Cleopatra, usually Cleopatra is not depicted among roses. There are a few Victorian representations, but when I went to see the sculpture in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian, um, I'm only 5 feet, and Edmonia Lewis was 4 feet, we think, or very short. But the rose literally, was at eye level. And, so I have a photograph of that image, and it's probably done not with the finger, but with a dowel, or an owl that she's using to make the dimple in the center of the rose. But, it just occurred to me that even now we have trans lives remembered with roses, a dedicated day of the roses. So, there's a photograph of Marsha P. Johnson that's the same one Tourmaline uses on their recent biography of Marsha P. Johnson, the famous activist, star for trans activism, connected to Stonewall era with Sylvia Rivera, who always wore flowers and often roses in her hair as a way of also signaling her queer community. So she would sometimes put a rose for someone who had died in her hair. Give us roses exactly before we are gone. Thank you, Matisse. That's exactly right. And so there's a picture, a statue that you can see at Penn of by Lewis called The Bride of Spring. And it has those same halo of roses, and really, again, so many carved roses. And there are a couple of other statues that spend a lot of time. There's a portrait of a woman that includes several roses that Lewis did in the 1870s. Yeah, I was again thinking about how does she fit into various kinds of queer traditions.
What I found really interesting was this letter from Addie Brown from Connecticut. And I just thought it brought me back hearing her describe her little encounter with another woman just brought me back to to my own experiences. It just felt so visceral in that moment reading that in the book. But what's the connection between Addie Brown and Edmonia Lewis?
Well, she knew of Edmonia Lewis because she was best friends and, lovers, according to Farah Griffin's work. Uh, Carol Smith Rosenberg writes about this, the female world of love and ritual, where there are these really intense erotic relationships among women in the 19th century, often solidified through letters. And I'm sure you have a lot at Queer History Boston. But so this one was. Addie Brown knew about Lewis from Rebecca Primus, whose brother, Nelson Primus, was a painter. And actually, he'd never found enough money to go to Europe. And he ended up in San Francisco, painting and doing other things. But so the Primuses were quite well known. And then also, Lewis lived amongst these middle class Black women in Boston. And so it was a small world of uh, freed Blacks. And so Addie Brown knew of her from Rebecca, and they had actually knew about images exchanged between them, some of those carte de visites. And so it's Addie who was working at Miss Porter's school in a supportive role, who also slept with some of the students. That's the same day she's writing, she's mentioning that to Rebecca. But she's the one who said famously, "I wish there was many more like Miss Edmonia Lewis." Um, and I think that phrase is so important because there probably were some others, even though we talk about Lewis in as singular, she wasn't anomalous necessarily. And I think that that's the other promise of history in the archives, is that we'll find more of these connections. Caitlin Beach has a piece about that middle class Black world I was talking about, where Lewis circulated in Boston before she left for Italy. There are all of these things that in some sense we might not even attempt to look for. And you have to look um, carefully to find them. But I saw this when I was a teenager and I was working at the Connecticut Historical Societies. I'm from partly Princeton, New Jersey, but then Hartford, Connecticut. So that was a summer job. And that's when I first came across this material. And again, didn't know that it would fall into place for me with
Wow.
Lewis.
Even then, she's kind of reaching out to you,
I'm
huh?
telling you, I feel very lucky.
That's incredible. And I think one of the important points you make from the Addie Brown letter, is that I think very often, throughout my reporting and research on Edmonia Lewis, she's often positioned as being in kind of like the center, or kind of like this locus of like white abolitionists and white women. And there's not as much of a focus on those friendships and those partnerships that she formed with Black women as well.
Mhm. And also the whole question of indigeneity. And I think that's another
Hmm.
area that's finally coming to light, and people thinking about global indigenous artists and
Mm,
how she fits in to those traditions as well.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think for a long time, because of her morphology, because she
Hmm.
was not necessarily um, thought to be enrolled, because of the ways in which, and Taya Miles is the expert in some ways on a lot of this material
Hmm.
of Afro-Native relations, that it's been historically she's been kept alive in the archives of Black art, from the very first Black art historical work from 1917 through, so many either feminists or queer or
Hmm.
predominantly really Black artists and art historians as that field has developed, and less so in terms of Native American studies. And so I'm so thrilled with work by, Gloria Bell and Mike Grote, and so many
Hmm.
other people now who are starting to really think about placing her more firmly and finding records, um, and thinking of her truly as an indigenous artist as well. So there are a
Hmm.
lot of always myths, and as I said, the truth, happens in the future, and the way we understand. We didn't even know where, Lewis was uh, or where her grave was until recently, right? So when
Right.
I was first working on this material 25 years ago, her death was not known.
Hmm.
So this is again the importance of archives, of conversations, of other forms of engaging with the past.
Mm. And I'm just sorry, going through the things that I have the slides on. Um, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit, only because Hygeia is like, you know, one of one of those pieces that folks can go and see themselves if they're
Yes,
located
please do it.
near Cambridge. Can we talk a little bit about her?
Yeah, it's on the Watertown Cambridge border, I think. But so
Mhm.
first of all, this cemetery, if you've never been, you must go because it's truly historic. It was the first pastoral cemetery in the United States. And this was a result of sort of crowding in church places, but then they
Mhm.
became these spaces where you could be seen memorializing, um, you know, uh, the dead where plots were there and above ground largely. And as people also got more money, I mean, Lewis was essentially a stone cutter, and a lot
Mhm.
of sculptors, regardless of their status, would also be either commissioned, as she was for this piece, to do memorializing work like this. So this is a piece that was for the first female doctor. She didn't have official training because women couldn't really go to medical school at the time, um, but who had a family plot. And the Hygeia is the goddess of hygiene, so it's appropriate in that way. And one of the things is that this sculpture was the first by a woman in the entire cemetery. Um, and for a long time, it wasn't really known about its history or origin, according to the archivist for the cemetery, which Arielle reports upon so beautifully with these gorgeous pictures by a colleague of hers that are taken in winter. This photograph is taken by Taya Miles, who's a professor at Harvard and works on Afro-Native studies. But this piece, you can see her face is kind of damaged because it's been outside since it was put up in 1872. Um, and her hand is broken off. Um, so if we think about corollaries between bodies and
Mhm.
sculptures, they are subject to uh, to damage, to destruction.
Mhm.
And I think, all of us can think about that in terms of the politics of commemoration that we are confronting, whether that's statues going up in a garden to commemorate the
Yeah.
250th, or more, recently, all of the activism towards such neoclassical works, even um, that were put up in the 20th century for the Confederacy with Black Lives Matter. You know, um, Even though this was been touched by weather, I think it points out the vulnerability of even things that were meant to stand the test of time, carved in the most durable material kinds of material. Um, so this is just a beautiful work of Lewis's, and there's the question of, do we restore it? How do we
Mhm.
treat it now that we again, know it's by Lewis, and more about its historic significance.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really struck me when I saw Hygeia in person was the weathering of her face and um some other things that you brought up as far as like really trying to experience her in the round, like in the totality of the sculpture, not just from the front. And then I was thinking too, you bring up this idea of haptically knowing sculptures and
Mhm.
kind of having that opportunity to touch. And you said, I want to take them off their pedestals, move them closer to our hands, and bring them more fully within our grasp. And that was just something I thought of with Hygeia because you can touch her. You
You
can
can,
you can touch her.
you can. And in doing so, you recover Lewis's touch across time
Yeah, seeing those
and the
chisel marks.
spiraling eddies of history.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
And then
exactly. You're freezing up just a little, Ariel, but I'm with you.
oh no.
It's
Let
okay.
me just turn my video off really quickly
Okay.
and see if that helps with the freezing, but you guys look fine to me. Everyone looks fine to me.
Great.
And then I think we have a couple of minutes left. Did you want to go
Wonderful.
back to Maud?
Or we can take questions from the audience either way. I mean, I guess I'll just say that, yeah, that first image was from my book from 1998, where I wrote a little bit about race and sculpture. It's been a long journey since then. But was an Afro-Scottish artist, multimedia artist, curator, amazing person. She died in 2008, but we were able to correspond, and she did the cover of my first book. But again, it wasn't until many years later that I realized that she also was interested in Edmonia Lewis, and her archive has just been put up at the Tate Modern in London, and you can go and look at her film script that she did, but she did an entire series. It was a multimedia installation where the term there, hysteria, is the name she gave to Lewis as a kind of fictional character. And she said, um, any of us can be lost. And what she was really interested in was preserving images of Black women at the center. And she would write Black women as one word. And so here she is. She did a lot of self-portraiture in the guise of Edmonia Lewis explicitly. But the character she invented to portray her was called Hysteria. And Hysteria actually falls in love in the script with one of the statues called Hagar, who was played by a person in this film script. And that's, of course, one of Lewis's sculptures. And, this has been, again, retelling the Galatea and why am I blanking on her name? That myth of the sculptor who falls in love with his sculpture, Pygmalion, the sculptor, and Galatea. That what does it mean when it's a woman sculptor sculpting another woman's body? And that intimacy and eroticism. And so, what you were talking about with the touch, I think this was something that Maud also was interested in. And she did large scale sculptures here for this and black and white photography. You can see that she's posed a little bit like that Rocher image we saw. And Salter did so much research to make this installation, which went up in 1991 and has been recently redone. But it included the whole story and, but it was disjunctive. It wasn't told perfectly because she again was interested in those gaps where we mentioned in the beginning of our meeting today of that's sort of what made it clear. She didn't want to tell everything, and she also engaged in critical fabulation with this movie script and sound and other kinds of things. And so it's a wonderful exhibition, and I hope it does get restaged soon.
Yeah, I think a good maybe point to end. You put in your book that Salter notes, as a Black person and a woman, I don't read history for facts. I read it for clues. And
Yes,
I think that that's a really great summary of a lot of what we've been talking about here tonight.
I agree. That's my method, following Salter.
So I guess we've got about 10 minutes left. We can open it up if anyone has any questions. I do see a note here from Jeff. Hysteria will be restaged at Tinworks Art in
Great.
Bozeman this fall.
Yes. And that's another great exhibit where they also commissioned some younger folks to do homages to Lewis in sculpture. And again, there's
Mhm.
so many. There's an opera, there are singers, everybody in whatever their form, video games, Google Doodles, postage stamps, and there's a whole thing to sort of talk about when are they going to Lewis the artist, and what then are they also doing in terms of reviving her work?
Mm.
So the art, and they've often been sutured, and I think we have to be careful about being too tautological in terms of how we read her life and her work together. And the life is so incredible that sometimes it can overtake our reading of the art. So I think I would
Mm,
follow a lot of folks now who are trying to really focus on the materials that she made as
mm.
well.
Right, right. Did we have any questions in the chat? I know I saw one person with their hand up earlier. So this is a question from Heather. Is there anything you can share about Edmonia Lewis and Margaret Foley? She was a mill girl in Lowell before becoming a sculptor and hanging out with Lewis in Rome.
Yes, well, they certainly knew each other, and I know that there's been a recent exhibition of Foley, and one of the very first was at my alma mater was at Vassar College, and they had a sculpture by Lewis and also by Foley. So I don't know what has been in the recent exhibition on Foley about her, but again, when I said more needs to be written and more people need to be involved in doing that history, I think that would be terrific. There is one book on the sort of sisterhood of these American women sculptors in Rome. And I think there's some mention there, but again, the relationships with Lewis, even by, we had a picture of Harriet Hosmer, who, knew her well. Hosmer doesn't really mention Lewis in her biography or autobiography that was published. So again, that those relationships, I feel like that's a whole nother place. I know there's some grad students in the room, everyday researchers, anybody, that's, I think, something that could be expanded upon.
Joan made a note, the Jolly Bachelors.
Oh, yes.
I think that's what we're referencing here.
That's what the group is
That's what the group is
called, the
called.
Jolly Bachelors of Rome. There are a few different books. You don't need
Yeah.
me to start creating you. Well, maybe people are interested.
Bibliography is important. I'm
I can
Yeah.
give you a whole list of books about them.
Yes.
Heather said, sounds pretty gay to me, LOL. Thank you.
Oh, yes, definitely. And, disparagingly called The White Marmorian Flock by
Oh my
Henry
God.
James. Yeah.
My goodness.
And he notes, and one of whom was a member of the darker races or something like that.
Goodness. Oh my gosh. Any more questions from anybody in the audience? I don't see any more questions
Okay.
in the chat, but I did want to quickly ask, I think it's always hard to answer this kind of question, but I think, what are some of the takeaways that you're hoping folks walk away with after engaging with your book?
Um, that's a difficult question, but I do think an important one. So,
Mm,
uh, one thing for me in writing it was that I just wanted to add to the really chorus and communities of voices to tell Edmonia Lewis's story or a story about her. So I want her name to be known. I think she wanted that very much, and she changed her name over the years, but Edmonia Lewis was how she often signed almost always her sculptures. Um, and so, at base level, I want that to happen. And more importantly, I'm hoping in terms of theoretical work and contributing to queer or Black feminist studies, that we think more seriously about how we index race and sexuality in these kinds of neoclassical works. What would be a way of telling a queer story about her? So I think that's important. Um, and also to kind of experiment with form in a way that I think we might not see it, but that Lewis did. To try to make something that approximates. This is what I was doing with taking up the very multifaceted, no pun intended, title of Moving Stones. Um, to play about it. Let's how many different ways can we read a rose? What more can we say about these images that for some people might be inaccessible, right? You've talked about that, Ariel, and as I said, I struggled with it, these forms. What is it that is important and meaningful about them, even for, contemporary audiences? Um, and what kinds of things can we imagine that she had those intimacies in the making of the work? That she really dedicated her life. Sculpting like this is a durational practice. These things take years to make. The marble's expensive to buy. Um, you know, what I want people to understand the significance of the work that she did. So Kirsten Buick, always talks about Lewis's career, not her biography. And again, in that, I think she also provides a certain kind of example. Um, yeah.
Thank you so much
No,
for
thank you.
this beautiful body of work. Everybody, please get your copy of Moving Stones. There is a link in the chat. Please, please, please get your copy and read it.
I'm
Thank
looking forward to
you.
getting mine any day now. So thank you all so much for your time and for being here. And especially, I just want to lift up Ariel. Look for her work on Instagram, and also especially Queer History Boston, because the work you do saves our lives in the most um, meaningful, weighty manner. I can say that.
Thank you so much for being here. I just want to say thank you to both of you for this work. Thank you, Jennifer, for this amazing book and taking the time to talk about your book with us. And Arielle, thank you so much for all these wonderful questions in this conversation. We really appreciate both of you and everyone. Like, yeah, get a copy of Moving Stones. Like, it's a treasure, and we love Edmonia here. Joan Iglaqua is on our call. Is on our on the
Yeah,
call.
and
She
there's
has
a
it.
picture of Edmonia on Joan's wall right behind, and the
Here.
little stamps of Edmonia.
We're
So,
huge fans of
We're fans.
Edmonia. We're big fans.
Yeah.
So,
well,
um,
we thank Boston for giving her a start.
Mhm.
exactly. But thanks
Yeah.
everyone for being here,
All
and
right. Have a
thanks
great
y'all.
night. Keep safe.
Bye
Oh,
Bye
and
everyone.
bye.
don't forget to come to our other Edmonia events.
Yes.
And
And see the
yeah, I know
bell and go
everyone's
to the
leaving,
cemetery.
but I was just gonna say, yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for all the work that you're doing. Sometimes we find these amazing narratives in the spaces between what's actually been preserved or documented in history, and that I feel like is a lot of the work that we do to find our queer and trans ancestors and to create the legacy we have. So thank you so much for all
I
of that
couldn't
work
agree
too.
more. Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.